So, I hope you're all having a great week, and it's wonderful to have you back for another episode of The Art of Business English. Now, I have just returned from 2 amazing weekends away. Last weekend, I was in Berlin attending a music festival, and the weekend before, I was in Paris catching up with old friends. While I was in Paris, I managed to interview a fantastic friend of mine, Alison Meston, who shared her experience with finding her identity and living abroad. So Alison, like me, is from Australia. However, she is the daughter of Scottish immigrants, and today she shares with us her experience growing up in Australia as an immigrant child, her return to Scotland to find her identity, and finally her move to Paris, where she has lived for the past decade. So also she shares with us her experience learning a foreign language and offers some interesting tips on how people can improve their English. So sit back and relax and get ready to enjoy an entertaining and personal interview here at the AOBE with my good friend Alison Meston. So welcome back to another episode of The Art of Business English, and here we are today in lovely sunny Paris on a wonderful June day, and I'm here with one of my good friends, Alison Meston, all the way from Perth, Western Australia. However, she does reside now in Paris, and she's going to be sharing a few little interesting stories with us today about her experience living abroad and working abroad. She's been here for how long, Alison?
For 10 years now.
10 years in Paris. So very similar to me. I've been in Barcelona for about 10 years. So, Alison, could you start just by telling us a little bit about who you are, your story?
Sure. So my story, I think, is quite typical for many Australian stories. And that is that my parents were immigrants to Australia. So they came to Australia in 1969 from the United Kingdom, from Scotland in particular. And I was born in 1973 to Scottish immigrant parents. So while I sound Australian and I grew up in Australia, I very much have a Scottish ancestry. Mm-hmm. And so when I got married at the age of 32, which was quite late in some respects,
Yes.
my husband and I decided to move to originally Scotland so I could be close to my grandma. Mm-hmm. And it was when I arrived in Scotland that I realised that I did not actually have an Australian upbringing.
How do you mean?
Well, because I'm a white Australian and we originally spoke English, I just look like most other white Australians. I didn't appreciate that the heritage that I grew up with was from 2 Scottish immigrants. So some of the words that I spoke and some of the things that we did were actually very Scottish. Mm-hmm. So, for example, at Christmas time, we would have a turkey. Now, you have to remember that Christmas in Australia is 35 degrees in summer. Yeah. So having a roast turkey and a hot plum pudding with hot custard is not logical. Yeah. So it wasn't until I got an Australian boyfriend that I realised every other Australian family was having this amazing barbecue or prawns or this kind of foods. And I remember coming home to my parents after my first Christmas with a boyfriend and saying, we are never having turkey ever again.
Yeah, because you had it every year, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So I think when you are an Australian that's born of immigrant parents, you do want to go and try and find your sense of place. Mm-hmm. And so because my father was a geologist, we moved around Australia a lot. We lived in Kalgoorlie, which is in the desert in Western Australia. We lived in
just
Melbourne.
For those that don't know, Kalgoorlie is the gold mining region of Western Australia.
Yeah, and it's very isolated in the it's the Timbuktu of Australia. And we lived in Melbourne on the east coast. So I went to many primary schools. So you want to try and find your identity. So I think that's one of the reasons why I left Australia in 2006 was to go and find my Scottish roots and go and spend some time in Scotland. And it was there that I found out that not only I had a Scottish Australian upbringing, but I had an Aberdonian Scottish Australian upbringing. So Aberdeen is on the north east coast of Scotland. And I was living on the west coast in Glasgow. And this is a very different language set. So I was using all of these Scottish words from the northeast when I was living in the west of Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
So I found my sense of place had changed even more, that even Scotland has different kinds of language,
Mm-hmm.
and that I was not speaking the language of Glasgow, I was speaking the language of Aberdeen.
Because of the influence of your parents.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so that was a very interesting journey for me.
Mm-hmm. And just so we're clear, the Scottish accent is quite strong and difficult for even for native speakers of
Sure.
English. Yeah.
So, for example, you know, I think one of the magic things about English, and we're from Australia, so we're a land of immigrants. So, you know, there's lots of different types of Australian English. There's Lebanese Australian English, there's Scottish English, there's Indian and Pakistani English.
Mm-hmm.
There's English, and then within England and Scotland, you have all these other dialects. You have
Mm-hmm.
Northern English, you have an English person from Croydon in South London sounds very different to an English person from North London.
Mm-hmm.
So Scottish English...
It's a challenge,
and
even for me.
well, I'll speak some for you. So for example, if you were in Scotland, in Aberdeen, and I was meeting you for the first time,
Yeah.
I might say... Oh, hello, Andrew. Furry boots.
Furry boots.
Yeah, so that sounds like in English furry boots.
Boots,
like
yeah.
boots with fur on them.
To me, it sounds like furry boots.
So furry boots means in English, from where are you about?
Wow.
Furry boots.
Yeah.
So I might say, you know, where I'm from. The other thing I might say in English, how are you? In French, we would say ça va.
Ça va. Yeah.
In Spanish, we would say
¿Cómo estás?
¿Cómo estás? In Aberdonian English, you would say fit like.
Fit like. I'm fit like what?
Fit like. And that would be, for what are you like?
Wow. Okay.
Fit like. And I would say, nae bad fruity cell. Not bad. How are you?
Wow.
So, you know, this is what's so amazing about English,
Yeah.
is that even in Scotland, in Aberdeen, which is a big city, there's a dialect.
Yeah, and I don't understand that as a
And you're an
native.
English speaker.
Yeah, and I speak English, yeah. That's
Yeah,
quite
and I
amazing.
understand it because I grew up with Aberdonian parents and an
Yeah.
Aberdonian grandma.
Yeah,
Now, people in Glasgow don't understand that.
yeah.
So I was saying these words and Glaswegians were like, oh, what are you talking about?
No, yeah, yeah.
So I think that was a very interesting aspect of my growing up, is that I learnt when I was young and living in Australia, I thought I was Australian.
Mm-hmm.
When I got an Australian boyfriend, I realised that I was
Not
Scottish
quite.
Australian.
Scottish Australian, yeah.
And it wasn't until I moved to Scotland that I realised that I had a very specific Scottish upbringing that had with it its very specific set of language and words.
Fantastic. Okay. So that was a while back. And then how did you get your way over to
Paris.
the mainland Europe?
Mainland Europe. So my husband was at his computer at our house, and he said to me...
This was in Scotland?
This is in Scotland,
Yep.
in Glasgow. And he said, I have this opportunity to apply for a job at Microsoft in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, you should do it. And then he said to me, I have a phone interview. And I said, well, you should do it. It's good practice having a phone interview.
In English?
Yeah, it was in English.
Yeah.
Because Microsoft were expanding and they needed English speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, I have a face-to-face interview. And I said, well, you should do it. It's a free trip to Paris.
Yeah.
And never in our wildest dreams did we think we'd be moving here.
Yeah.
And then he said to me, I got the job. And at the time, I was in a good job with the Red Cross, the Croix Rouge. And I said, well, I think we should do it. And he said, I agree. I think I would... The moment you tell someone you don't want the job in Paris, you will regret it.
Yeah, I agree.
And both of us could not speak French.
So at this time, how old were you,
I was
more or less?
35.
Okay.
And my husband was a bit older. So he was 46. And so here are two people who... I had high school French. And in an ironic twist, my mother is a French teacher in Australia.
I did not know that. Yeah.
And so I did 2 years of French when I was 13 and 14.
Yeah, I did French 2 years as well, I think.
Yeah, and at
the
time, I wasn't enjoying it. I think the problem with language in Australia is often young Australians don't take it seriously.
Yeah. I think that's a problem in many countries.
I think it's a bit different in Europe, though, because I think you're exposed to so many languages on the continent.
Possibly,
but I know, and I think most people, if they look back at their time in school, they gave their language teacher a hard time.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I said to my parents, I no longer want to do French. I want to study Japanese. Because we're in Australia and we do all this trade with Japan.
Yeah.
And why would I learn French? And I remember my mother... Well, I got brought to the proper dining table, which meant that I was in trouble.
That was serious.
It was a serious conversation.
Yeah.
And my mother said, Alison, lots of countries speak French, not just France. And my father, and I will never forget this, my father said to a 15-year-old girl, or 14 or however old I was, if you don't learn French, you won't understand highbrow political cartoons. So highbrow means, your eyebrows, are pointed up in triangles.
Yes.
You won't understand the posh cartoons.
Yes.
So a 14-year-old girl is not going to
appreciate
or resonate with this.
Yeah.
But they're words that they have stuck with me forever.
Mm-hmm.
So of course I learned Japanese, and of course that's absolutely useless.
So you did learn Japanese?
For a bit,
Were there challenges with that? Was it easy?
It was because I was going on an exchange at school. So,
Mm-hmm.
it was very hard because obviously it does not have a Roman-based
with numbers.
language system. So, but I think one of the problems with learning languages in Australia is, for example, we would learn things like, je voudrais un kilo de pommes. I would like a kilo of apples.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have lived in France for 10 years, and not once have I ever used the phrase, I would like a kilo of apples. I've never asked for a kilo of anything because our apartment is too small to have a kilo of anything.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So you arrive in a country, you are 35, you don't speak the language.
Yeah, I was the same. A bit younger, about 30.
Yeah,
but
so
I arrived with hola.
Mm-hmm.
Mi nombre es Andrew. Y ya está.
Yeah.
So you moved to France in about 2010, was it?
2009.
2009, okay.
And then my husband is working.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
So how do you integrate?
So you've got to appreciate I'm a woman who's been brought up as a feminist.
Uh-huh.
I've never not worked.
Yeah.
And I've given up a good job and I followed my man.
Oh.
So this had its own...
psychological barriers.
Difficulties.
Yeah.
And so I felt that my job was for us to integrate. So the first thing I did was join a language school.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined a local language school where I did French from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. every day.
Okay.
And this was quite a bohemian language school, so they just wanted to get you speaking. So I did not go to the Alliance Française, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I just went to a local school. And after 3 months of this, I felt confident enough to ask 2 of my elderly neighbours who lived in my apartment to après-midi dessert, afternoon tea.
Oh, okay.
And Amelia lived downstairs directly below us. She was Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And Henri lived across from her, and he was Algerian and had moved from Algeria to France after independence because he was Jewish.
Okay.
Very conservative. And so Henri, after our afternoon tea, has said to me, neither of them spoke any English, but he said to me, Alison, you have spoken the worst French I have ever heard in my life. And you will report to my house tomorrow for dictation.
Oh, dictation.
Yeah.
Traditional methodology.
Traditional method.
It works. I agree.
And so for a long time I did dictation with Henry.
Fantastic.
And, we had a very special relationship. He was
Yeah.
an old man in France,
Yeah.
and I was a young Australian woman.
Mm-hmm.
He had very old-fashioned ideas about women, and I am a feminist.
Yes.
So you can imagine
good mix.
The type of discussions we have.
When you were doing 3 months of English of French, and then did you stop when you started doing the dictation classes?
Well, with Henry, I was practicing French, and then I just put myself out there. So, for example, I would always ask people to speak French to me. Mm-hmm. And at parties, French people would say, "Oh, my English is not so good," and then they'd speak perfect English, and I would roll my eyes. So I think one of the key things that I found in the first year was I really lost my personality.
Do you know what? That's exactly the same thing that happened to me.
Yeah.
I had 3 months of Spanish lessons in Barcelona from Monday to Thursday, I think it was, and in the morning, 9 to 1.
Yeah.
And then I stopped after 3 months and just did the same. Like,
you lose your personality.
Yeah.
So it's almost as if I could press the play button and I could say, "Oh, I'm from Australia. I have a sister and brother. Did you know that we eat kangaroos? Oh, how funny." You weren't able to be your usual
funny self.
You couldn't joke. And so I found that, I think for the first 2 years I found that really tough.
That's exactly the same as me.
And the only thing I would say is you just have to put yourself out there, and it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And there are going to be times when you don't understand what the person is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a good analogy. It's like a game of tennis. So I am saying French to you, or if I'm a second language English speaker, I'm saying English to you, and I hit the ball over the net, and you hit it back to me, and we've understood, and we can be understood.
Mm-hmm.
We can understand and we can be understood. There are times when you're going to hit the ball into the net.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or there are times when the other person is going to hit the ball into the net, and it's going to happen 5 times in a row and you want to give up. You just have to push past. Yeah. And it's really tough. So now after 9 years, in the European language, I'm a B2, which means that I'm
first certificate
that
level.
I'm okay.
Yeah.
That I can talk about complex things, and I'm perfectly comfortable in a casual environment, speaking French. Am I comfortable in a business environment speaking French? I would say if I'm at a conference in Africa where it's Francophone and I'm talking to somebody one-on-one at the coffee break, fine. Would I be comfortable saying it in the hall at the Congress where we're talking? No, I would speak in English.
What about giving presentations, formal presentations?
I've given presentations in French before, but again, it's because it's been written down and someone has checked it.
Okay.
So I'm not there yet, and to get there, I'd have to do a bit of work.
Okay. Yeah, because, that is one of the challenges that many of our listeners have. They're required to deliver presentations in English, participate in meetings, and I've always said, you have to put yourself out there. So you have to really just keep trying. Don't shy away from situations where, English is spoken. But people just lack the confidence to be able to deliver this presentation. And I've always said, as long as you can sell your idea or sell your service in English, that's enough.
I think there's 2 things that I'd say to that. I have been in smaller meetings when there's been 20 or 30 of us around a table. Mm-hmm. And we've had someone from Morocco, for example, who's presented something in English. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear that some of the words aren't right, or that they were mixing in a bit of French and English. Mm-hmm. And for me as a French speaker, it was fine. But for the people in the room who could not speak French, they found it a bit difficult. Mm-hmm. I have been on other occasions where I've been in a very big room with 200, 300 people, where there have been French and English interpretations, and someone from Latin America has come where Spanish has not been interpreted. So they've had to speak English, and they had real trouble, and it put them in a difficult position, and it put us in a difficult position. Mm-hmm. So I think in one respect you're right, you have to put yourself out there, and I think most English speakers, because we are, or anyone who's speaking your language and it's their second language, they're having a try. They're giving it a go. You should be welcoming.
Yeah.
However, in a business situation, I think you have to choose your audience. And I think there have been some occasions when people have just not been ready, and that can then actually put them back.
So what advice do you have for those? Because the problem is if we give people advice that they are not ready, then people will always have the excuse that I'm never ready. So, I mean, my advice has always been to get the skills, start at a manageable level. So in your next meeting, okay, normally when I talk meetings, I'm talking like 5 or 6 people.
Yes.
Every opportunity on the phone, 1-to-1, take that opportunity.
Yeah.
Every email you've got, send that email. So, and every chance you have to interact with someone who, someone who's native, try
Every time I'm in an Uber
Yeah.
or a taxi in Paris,
Yeah.
I talk to them.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Even if it's about football and I'm not interested in it,
Yeah.
right? But I talk because it's a free French lesson for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Because
I
I'm
agree.
in their car for 30 minutes.
And it's nice too. I mean, they're driving you somewhere. I mean,
Yeah.
you do pay them, but I mean, the experience, the people you meet, it's the perspective on the world.
So I think that part's important. But I also think it's about, ask yourself these questions. Is this a meeting with my peers? If the answer is yes, and your peers are sympathetic, then fine. You say to them at the beginning, everybody, I'm practicing my English or I'm practicing my French. I would like to do this meeting, so bear with me. If you're going to a major conference where there are people from all over the world, where the working language is English, sit down with someone with your speech and practice saying it.
Yeah.
Okay. And practice and anticipate the questions.
Yeah, that's what I always say.
So do a role play afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, when people learn French, they come to Paris and they go to a restaurant and they order a steak, and then the waiter says quelle cuisson, which means how would you like it cooked? And people are not prepared for that. They're not prepared for that response.
Yeah.
And they get panicked.
Yeah.
So it's the same if you're learning business English. What kind of questions are they going to ask you? One of the best French lessons I ever had was with a French teacher who said to me, what are your passions? And I said, well, cooking is my passion. So for the first 5 or 6 lessons, we only spoke about cooking.
Nice.
So I could talk about all the French words to do with cooking a meal. So if you're doing business English and you're in the business of pharmaceuticals, or you're in the business of graphic design, or you're in the business of marketing, say to your English teacher, I only want to talk about marketing.
Exactly.
And so that you understand the linguistics.
That's right. Another thing I always recommend, I mean, the number of times that, you know, when you do needs analysis of a student's needs, you say, okay, in what situations do you need English? How are you using English? And what areas of business? So they say, what vocabulary do you need? And people say everything. Right. I mean, you can't really give someone everything. You need to give them very specific, targeted vocabulary based on topics. So I always try and offer people specific vocabulary based on topics, because that way it's much easier to learn 5 or 10 new words or phrasal verbs or expressions related to a topic than everything. Yeah.
The other thing I've done to learn French is watch YouTube videos. And there's a couple of television shows, and I am sure they exist. Well, they do exist in English. So one of them, in French, it's called Dîner presque parfait, Dinner nearly perfect. In English, what is it called?
There's a million shows.
It's the one. It's where where 4 ordinary people cook dinner for each other and then grade their results.
Okay, I've never seen it.
Okay, but the good thing about this show is that it's people having dinner. So they're ordinary people talking about ordinary things around the dinner table, which is what we do in our daily lives.
Exactly.
Now, I would never watch this show in English, which is why I can't remember the name. The other show that I watch in French is called La Reine du Shopping, the Queen of Shopping.
Okay.
Now, this show is about 4 women who have to go shopping.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a ridiculous show that I would never watch in English.
Yeah.
But the reason I watch it in French is it's about shopping and your daily life.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes when we learn a language, we have to, particularly if we're a business person or if we are university educated or something like that, we don't watch television shows that are reality television.
Yeah, we don't. We see them as lowbrow.
Yes, we do.
Oh, I'm not going to watch that.
No,
it's
I'm
a
not
waste of
gonna
my
watch that.
time.
It's a waste of my time.
Yeah.
However, if you're watching it in a different language,
Yeah.
it's people interacting on a daily life. Watching documentaries in a different language is excellent because you're watching the vision and there's just one person talking.
Exactly.
And so there are some good little ideas on how to...
Do you watch movies?
I do.
French?
I find watching movies in French difficult because...
Yeah, me too. They're very difficult.
It just goes too fast.
Yeah, I agree.
And you miss the nuance.
Yeah, and I think what I tell my students, they say, I've started watching television or movies in English suddenly. And I'm like, you know what? I've lived in Spain for 10 or 11 years or 12 years now. I don't watch movies in Spanish. It's extremely difficult. And I think it's not a good way to judge your level of English if you can't understand
if you're an English as a second language speaker and you can watch a movie in English without the subtitles, bravo.
Bravo, exactly.
But again, don't forget, the difference is that the three biggest movie making countries in the world are America, Nigeria and India, who are all English speaking countries. And the big blockbusters that come out of Hollywood are English. And the internet, the language of pop culture on the internet and the songs that come out of the US are English. And the language of computers is English. And the language of business at the moment, I'm afraid to say, is English. And so I think for English as a second language speakers, I understand the need to watch English films.
Yeah. However, depending on your level, I mean, you need to be very realistic, I think. You should take it step by step. I think if you can read as well, like short books or very targeted books that are only 250, 500 pages, magazines, things, I mean, taking it one step at a time. I think people have unrealistic expectations of what they can achieve. I mean, you and I, in our situation, we're a bit lucky. We came with nothing, okay. Yeah. 0 French, 0 Spanish. But we had 3 months of 9 to 1 dedicated to being able to actually form a base. So I think it also depends on, you need to be realistic about how much time in a day as an adult you have got to dedicate.
Sure, and again, it depends on what type of job you do. I mean, my day-to-day job is a mixture of English and French. It's mostly in English, but there is French as well. But my actual day job is in human rights. So at the end of the day, I'm actually quite tired and my brain's quite tired. And so the last thing I want to be doing is learning French. So you really have to set aside short amounts of time to go. So, for example, I say to myself, in the morning when I'm reading the news, I'm going to read the French news. I'm going to spend 15 minutes reading the French news. And sometimes I'll write down a word that I don't know. And there are some words that I can never remember. Like I see this word all the time and I can never remember what it means, and I keep forgetting.
But you understand the context of what's going on.
Yeah, now I can understand the context. But at the time, I didn't completely understand the context. I mean, so, and again, learning a language isn't a linear line.
Exactly.
It goes up and down. You plateau, you reach a certain aspect. One of the things I did to help me learn French was I volunteered.
Okay.
So I was a volunteer for a dance group. So I was the person who collected money at the door.
Okay.
So that enabled me to kind of put myself out there and...
And you make friends, obviously. And I was the same. Yeah. But do you feel like an outsider always?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I'm the same.
I think even French people who don't grow up in Paris who move here feel like outsiders.
Yeah,
I mean, and you rarely meet a Parisian.
Okay.
You often meet people who are French who've grown up elsewhere. I mean, rarely do I meet a Parisian.
Yeah.
So I think most people who are like us, who've moved around, are citizens of the world, and we meet other citizens of the world. So the French friends that I have are friends who've lived in New York, or who've lived in Buenos Aires, or who've lived in Singapore. They tend to be global citizens.
And do you think, like, being global, I mean, I've always said that having this global outlook on life, it just, the opportunity spectrum and the people you can meet, the things that actually happen as a result of having met people in the past. I mean, we met years ago in Australia.
I can't even remember how.
I know, we did, but in Australia. But the thing is, the fact that you're here now and I'm in Barcelona, we would never have ever thought that. But
no, when we met at university 25 years ago.
25 already?
We would not, or maybe 20.
Yeah.
We would not. If I had said to you, Andrew, I bet in 20 years' time you and I will be sitting in my apartment in Paris having a chat, we would have both taken that. But no, it's not going to happen. But I mean, let's go back to what I said at the beginning. You know, I'm a global citizen, but the reason I'm a global citizen is because I moved to Scotland to try and find my sense of place in the world.
Yeah.
Because I didn't understand my sense of place of how I grew up in Australia, because I was an immigrant child.
Yeah.
Even though I was an immigrant child from the British norm, I wasn't an immigrant child of Vietnamese background or Lebanese background or Chinese background. I was an immigrant child of the dominant British culture in Australia. But I still needed to get away to find myself.
Yeah.
And to find my place.
I don't know how far back my heritage goes in Australia, but I definitely felt like I had to get out to find myself.
Yeah.
Like, maybe in a different way. I don't know.
Yeah, but me trying to find my sense of place in the world, I would argue that I'm a global citizen now.
I think too. My perspective is very global.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, nowadays I try and always think globally and can maintain the relationships with my friends who I've met abroad, who I've met here and there. And I think nowadays it's much easier to maintain those relationships.
And isn't it lovely when you go to another country? You know, Andrew and I have just had lunch today, and the waiter is from Spain. So,
from Cordoba.
So Andrew was speaking Spanish with him. I was speaking French with him. And here are two Aussie people
expats,
in Europe who have learnt different languages at a later stage in life.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful thing it is to know that you can go to another country and speak the language. And Spanish is one of the key languages in the world. French is one of the key languages in the world. They're both United Nations official languages. Because I can speak French, I can go to Italy and read a menu and understand it. You would be the same, because French and Spanish and Italian
and Catalan
all have their roots in Latin.
Yeah.
And we would not have had this opportunity had you and I not left Australia.
Exactly.
And had taken this plunge.
Yeah, big step. That's the thing. We've just thought to ourselves, well, I didn't really think. I just did. I never thought of the other option. I thought, I'm going to do this, and the options just didn't appear.
Well, we didn't think we'd be away for this length of time, and we've now bought a place in Paris, and we're European.
Yeah.
You know, I think, again, people listening to this might think, oh, Australia, you know, it's the land of milk and honey. Yeah. But it is very, very far away.
Yeah.
It is very homogenous. People, even though there's immigrants, it's still very white. And if you can hear that, that's the cat coming in. It's Paris cat coming by the microphone. Yeah. And I can be on a train in Paris, and there's all sorts of different people on this train. And I went back to Australia a few months ago, and I was on a train, and I just thought, wow, this does not look anything like where I live.
No.
And that made me sad.
Yeah.
So I think being able to... The other thing I love, and we haven't spoken about this, but the other thing I find in France is I'll be at a restaurant, and there'll be a table next to me where everyone is speaking English, but they all have accents.
Oh, fantastic.
So they're all from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
They're from Germany, they're from Spain, they're from France, they're from Italy, they're from Hungary, they're from Poland, they're from Serbia. But the common language is English.
Yeah.
And this is how important English is in today's world.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not.
Exactly.
English is a language of business.
Yeah.
It is the common language in Europe. You need to know it.
And it makes life so much easier, and you have so many opportunities knowing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that has been absolutely phenomenally interesting, and we've only really just scratched the surface. I'm sure we'll have to come back again and do another interview. But thank you very much. I really appreciate
Andrew.
having you. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the Art of Business English, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Andrew. It's been a pleasure to have a chat with you this afternoon.
Yeah, we'll do it again soon.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
darling.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, I hope you found the episode today very interesting. It was lovely for Alison to share her experience with us. And just one more thing before we go. My friends over at the Power Day Sale website, which is a female fashion clothing website, they have decided to share with me, because they love me, I guess, a discount code of 20%. So if you girls are interested in free international shipping and some fantastic clothes for summer, then check out the website Power Day Sale. I'll put it in the show notes. And basically, if you use the discount code at the checkout AOBE in capital letters, then you'll get a 20% discount. So yeah, a little bit of summer love for you guys. And I hope you all have a great week. And I'll see you all next week on the Art of Business English. Take care and bye for now.